book, which is really starting to understand the health effects of particles. So the whole "why are we interested in this" kind of question gets asked here. It's got a neat little activity where we talk about how much air we can actually exhale, and kind of gets them thinking about particles in our lungs as well. So it's kind of, this is the section I was talking about, has an introduction to the air quality index, a little bit more in depth and understanding things like forced expiratory volume, which is like a thing that like epidemiologists can use to understand kind of the potential impacts of pollution on respiration as well. Talk about different factors that can affect lung capacity as well. Kind of one of the components here. So, kind of the section leads with the question of, why do we care about particles? What does that matter to my health? And so, basically, due to the really small size of particles, they're so small that they can get through into our mouths, into our noses, and make their way into the lungs and potentially into the bloodstream. So this is a nice little kind of figure here that shows, the main parts of the respiratory tract, both upper and lower, and kind of understanding what size particles are capable of getting into what parts of the body, essentially, right? So more coarse PM, as we call it, so those between 2.5 and 10 or anything smaller than that, can basically make its way in through the nose. It's not filtered out by any of the little hairs that you have in your nose or anything like that. Makes its way in. Those that are extremely small, things that are ultrafine particles, less than a micron in diameter, make their way in. They can make their way into your lungs, get into the alveoli over here, which are the little air sacs that kind of help exchange air, and from there can enter into the bloodstream as well, potentially. And so now you're talking about, depending on the type of particle it is, you could possibly be introducing kind of toxic chemicals into the body that way as well. So that's kind of the extreme of particle pollution as well. There are things, obviously, we know can cause throat irritation. We know for the, allergies, that's affecting your eyes and your nose and your throat right there. That same thing, any particle can do that potentially. Cause these respiratory issues. Things like asthma can be aggravated by bad particle pollution. Bronchitis can be made worse or happen. So kind of short-term ailments, but as well as long-term ailments. If you're chronically exposed to this type of pollution, think about what that means in a lifetime, right? And I think you can look at asthma rates in California, and you can see the areas with bad air quality have increased asthma rates as well. It's not, it's not rocket science. It's all pretty straightforward. It makes sense. In a really extreme case, not only just the ones simpler things that we talked about, but not only can it affect the respiratory problems, but now you're talking other organs can potentially be affected. Heart, you can develop potentially, issues related to the heart as well through chronic exposure to bad air quality. So this kind of just talks about those things in general, just kind of a general overview. Then it introduces, how do we then keep track of what's in our air quality to make sure that we're preventing these things from happening, or at least we have a sense of what's coming in. And this is where we really talk about the air quality index. So the AQI, as we refer to it, basically is developed by the EPA as a way to communicate the potential risk of air quality to the general public.
Airnow.gov.
Airnow.gov, actually, yes. So STI actually developed and hosts AirNow for the EPA. That's one of our biggest clients is the EPA running AirNow. So we have folks who basically the air quality index serves as kind of a forecast what we think the air quality impact could be on folks, within a few hours to a couple of days of being exposed to a certain amount of pollution as well. So the AQI is this color and number scheme. You guys have probably seen this, especially when there's fires happening, so it shouldn't be so new to folks. But basically it's broken down into these kind of 6 levels. Each one of those is kind of given a numerical value, which is kind of an aggregation of the 6 different criteria, pollutants, and kind of a, there are different mathematical weights to them to help come up with a numerical value. But we can directly relate not only the numerical, this kind of bigger number, but it can equate to an actual concentration, right? So if this is showing PM 2.5, this gives the actual concentration, the actual micrograms per cubic meter amount, and that relates to kind of the different level of concern as well. So
on the Air Now site, it tells you can actually read, it'll tell you that PM is parts per million, looking at particles in the size range of 2.5, microns or larger or whatever, and it tells you that on the airnow.gov website. And I think it's pretty student accessible, especially for the high school students.
yeah, absolutely. And color-coded schemes are easy to understand too, right? So the deeper the red is probably less good. So it's a really nice kind of easy tool to help understand and communicate that air quality level of risk. So we've got, anything kind of below a numerical value of 100 is considered pretty, decent air quality. That means it's below the National Ambient Air Quality Standard, which I think for PM, an annual amount should be less than 12 micrograms per cubic meter, I believe, and so that's what the value is right here. This middle moderate area basically equates to what the allowable rate is according to the EPA. So anything below that we're going to consider good or moderate. And then we start to get into the kind of unhealthy sections, so that a value of 100 to 150 in AQI is kind of that intermediate step. For sensitive folks, that might be a really uncomfortable day. Don't spend a lot of time outside. By the time you get to the air quality value of 150, it's potentially bad for everybody. So I don't know if you guys I don't know how bad did the smoke get here during some of the recent fires?
It got beyond the measurement ability of the compliance monitors. It was over 600 micrograms per cubic meter.
Yeah, so that's kind of day where everybody should absolutely be outside. If you're going to be outside, you should be wearing a mask.
Well,
So
we actually we lost 2 full school days and 3 half school days.
due to bad air quality. I mean, the same thing that happened in the Bay Area. I think it was, the big Paradise Fire, things like, it was in the fall, so I think Berkeley, for example, canceled their games, canceled their sports activities. There was a big football game that was supposed to happen that weekend. Couldn't happen that weekend if people can't even breathe.
That was just in October of this year, those dates.
But not all those days were bad air days. They were just being, abundance caution.
It was because of the bad air though.
Not according to the air pollution control district.